We speak of and worry about World War III, but has a cold World War III already begun?
Big question. Olga.
Okay, so I'm going first. Yeah, that's a very big one. We've been talking about the Third World War, I think, for the last 2 years, at least in Europe. You know, definitely there's a lot of conflicts, war conflicts happening globally. And I checked actually some statistics for this, chat, and it looks like last year in December, we were at the biggest number of wars happening globally, right? I think it's between 45 to 55 war conflicts happening globally at this moment. So you can judge for yourself, right? So definitely we are now in a very hot point. Definitely we see that the level of the Cold War, which is actually happening, can quickly transform into a hot withstanding between the key leaders in the regions. So it's a very hard question to say, will it happen when it happened? But, judging by the dynamics, it looks like we are really at a very turning point in time at the moment.
Peter, are we, in historical terms?
I think when we use the word World War, we tend to think back, of course, to the two great wars of the 20th century and how that engulfed the flames of Europe, brought in every corner of the world. And I suspect that what we're looking at today is slightly different. It's localised fractures. Like Olga says, we have more wars happening at the end of last year than at any point in the last 30. Defence budgets around the world are all going to go up in the coming years. And, the law of math tells you that the more investment you make in your defence forces, the more likely there are to be problems. So the real big challenge, I think, is about the nuclear proliferation, high levels of big weaponry that can be used either through bad planning and through malevolence, or through the kinds of fractures where contacts between fighter jets between different countries can have chain reactions that can engulf us all. So there are lots of small fires burning. I'd probably think that
they all sort of come together and
well,
then
I
there's a
suspect
giant
that those
bushfire?
small ones will get bigger. I don't see at the moment a war that brings us all in. In fact, most countries in the world are highly neutral on Russia and Ukraine for bad, but have choosing to abstain, not getting involved, helping to move weapons, helping to move materials into Russia through different third-party states. So most people are trying to stay out of it and stay out of the way. So World War looks very different to the world where Australians, Indians and others gave their lives to fight wars that meant something in Europe. So I suspect we're looking at something that can engulf us, but not on that kind of scale.
Malcolm Turnbull?
Look, I think I agree with both friends here. I think there's a lot of hot wars going on. We don't, thank heavens, have a world war at this stage. You mentioned a Cold War. Is the tension between the United States and China reminiscent of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union? There are some similarities, but more differences, to be honest. I mean, the Soviet Union and the United States and its allies had very little economic integration. China is the largest trading partner of most countries in the world, and certainly of the United States and Australia and most of the countries in this region. So the degree of economic integration between these competitive superpowers is something that's quite different. So plenty of complexity and plenty of risks, but not yet a third world war, let alone a cold one.
Rebecca?
I think what's kind of interesting when you do focus groups of Australians about the extent to which they think we might be headed towards a kind of global conflict. Their biggest concern really, other than China, and there's concern around China, is that we might be headed towards a kind of global conflict around things like water, and that those kinds of scarce resources in the future might, caused by climate change, might actually bring those things about. But when it comes to global conflicts, I've got to say most of the Australian community are kind of just really focused on domestic concerns. So we saw a lot of support for the Ukraine against Russia when hostilities first happened. We're starting to see that decline. At the moment, we've got a community divided on what's happening in Gaza. And so Australians don't tend to think an enormous amount about global wars, which means, of course, that we don't turn our minds towards what the government's doing, which is probably a problem.
Jioji, obviously, in our own region, there's the the threat of a potential looming conflict, the Pacific obviously is being wooed by the West. Australia is part of that, and obviously China.
Yes, and I think that's something that in the Pacific we're conscious of, is the different countries, different entities that are trying to compete for our attention. And I think that in and of itself is also creating levels of conflict within each of the countries in the islands. And I think that then creates a level of uncertainty. Just to the point where you're saying around some of the global conflicts, I think one of the key things that I think we need to be mindful, especially in Australia, is the humanity associated with, but also what flow and effect that has for refugees and asylum seekers. And I think that's when Australia starts to become more interested in this, is that then there's a flow-on effect, especially even with what's happening in the Pacific, let alone what might be happening overseas in other countries and territories.